Hey folks, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I've got Ross and David with me. They've got a collab project going on in the DMs Guild. This honor and devotion. I keep wanting to say dishonor for some reason. Don't know why, but it's flavored from Kara-Tur, Forgotten Realms. So I know a lot of people in the chat, or before we even started, seem very excited about this topic, and being able to get some Asian or Eastern mythology into their D&D game, or maybe they're fans of the old box set, or going back even further. We had Oriental Adventures in AD&D with we were talking about that a little bit, that was one of my favorite covers of all time. Like that, that was just amazing. So, how are you gentlemen doing today?
I'm doing pretty great. A little bit nervous. My first time doing one of these live chats, so just trying to make sure I'm not making a fool of myself, I guess.
Well, so far so good, but it's early.
True.
Yep, definitely excited to be here. Taking a little bit of time out of work on my lunch break, so very excited.
So awesome. So how did this project come about? How did you guys start collaborating? And also for anyone joining us, if you don't know, you can find all the links in the description. Um, for social media, websites, all that good stuff to follow these guys, and as well as take a look at the product as well.
Well, I think from my perspective, the way this really began was I was lurking on the Unearthed Arcana subreddit, and I saw this really cool thing called I can't remember exactly what it's called. I know now it's called Path of the Unchained Mind, and it was the idea of this psionic barbarian subclass, and just sounded really cool to me. So I went on, read it over, and gave some comments, and that's kind of how David and I first came into contact.
Yep.
Over psionic barbarians.
Yep.
That's how all great things start, right? Psionic barbarians.
Yeah. No,
But then, no, please go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say I've got a pretty big pet passion there with the psionics, and the feedback that I got from Ross was very helpful, very well communicated, and very number driven. He definitely demonstrated right away a good grasp of the underlying system of the game. So we started a little bit more frequent conversation from there.
So you know what? Before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of the product you guys, the joint collab you guys did together, do you each want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the other stuff you've done and what you've done on your own?
Works for me, yeah.
I can start you, Ross. Jump in there.
So I am the director and founder of a little third-party publishing group called Outlandish Adventure Productions. And our kind of philosophy is to give people what they want in a way they didn't know they wanted it. Uh, Mostly with weird mechanics or interesting lore ideas. Our first product was the Sculptor, and that came about with everyone's desire of let's make an intelligence-based half-caster, dang it, because we only had the paladin and the ranger in the PHB, and so I saw a whole bunch of homebrews of that, and I kind of decided people are doing a lot of spell swords. How can I do this weird? And from there, I like, what if it summoned weapons? What if they took magic and they sculpted it into things? And that evolved into the sculptor over the course of a couple years of development. And finally, in March, I uploaded it and decided to create the OAP brand, and here we are a little over a year later.
And you, David?
Yeah, so I do quite a bit freelance just for myself. I'm actually employed full time in kind of a financial software company. But yeah, my work stretches all the way back to fourth edition. I tried to get some stuff in the end of 3.5, but didn't quite make it. So pretty early on in fourth edition when they relaunched Dragon Magazine, I jumped in and had a few publications there. I did Winning Races Kinku back in the day, some material for clerics. I adapted a few, was it Primal Spirits, I think they were called, for the Druids, for Dark Sun. back then. Had some material published in what was it, the Kobold Quarterly, back when that was a magazine that Kobold Press did. Had some stuff on their blogs, a few contests there, and then I publish some homebrew stuff on the DMs Guild. A lot of stuff that just I myself would like to see. A lot of collections. I love psionics, so I've got some stuff with some of the UA material for the Mystic that I've done there, as well as just a lot of other class-based subtypes, a few new classes. Then I most recently, Masters and Minions from Jetpack 7. They picked me up as an additional writer sort of on the tail end of that process, so I've got some monsters and magic items that appear in there, and I'm doing some blog posting for them as well.
Cool, awesome. And they're telling me I'm a little loud today. I can try and fix that for you guys. See if that helps, because I got a big mouth too. That's the other problem. So we're talking a little bit, with one of the tricky issues about working on a project like this, and I've seen some of the pitfalls in the DMs Guild already, where, and if you look back to the original Oriental Adventures, it's a bit insensitive, and So one of the things we had talked about off air is, were you cognizant of that, and what did you do to address that while working on this project?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of it came down to language. We tried to make sure that we were aware that, a lot of the things that people, aren't comfortable with in terms of the Orientalism and that sort of perspective, really comes down to making things like seem exotic just because they're different. And so we really, where things really were exotic, we wanted to clearly communicate that rather than just sort of constantly repeating that, this is exotic, that's exotic, to make it more of a guide so that it felt more grounded, that there was an understanding that, this stuff was very much had kind of a mythology that existed behind it rather than just being sort of, exotic for the sake of exoticism. And I think, a lot of that grounding it within Kara-Tur, and letting kind of real world myth and tradition inform that, definitely helped. Because it wasn't like we were just trying to copy one-to-one existing real world traditions. It was more about making it fit with the story that already existed.
Yeah, it was a lot of research, and at least on my end, David was much more familiar with the kind of underlying beliefs and principles from his background, and so I did a lot of research, and I think a lot of it was just trying to make sure it was as authentic and, as David said, grounded as possible, and just trying not to make things... I know my brand is outlandish, but we didn't want to make these things seem outlandish, I guess. Just try to keep things grounded and authentic, yeah.
Makes sense. So, each of you, what was your favorite part about working on this project? You can start, Ross.
For me, my favorite was seeing the different ways that David and I kind of created the subclasses and how we built things. Because for me, I was a math education major in college. I'm very mathematically numbers driven, and so for me, a lot of it is the bottom up approach of creating really cool mechanics and finding things to fit that. But what I loved was seeing David's approach of, here's this really, really cool lore thing. Let's build mechanics to fit that. And meeting in the middle there was a really rewarding, really cool experience.
Yeah, for sure. That was a lot of fun times working through the drafts, and I mean, for the most part, even though, like Ross said, I like to start with story and lore. There are times where the mechanics don't really support the initial lore that we thought we wanted to incorporate, and so we would make changes to make it a good fit between both perspectives. And so that was really enjoyable because, yeah, kind of working on your own, you can get sort of tunnel vision in terms of your design, and lose the flexibility that you need to really make some great material. And I feel like that's what we were able to do here. Um, Specifically, though, I gotta say the sorcerer Netsuki material that we the little the little ribbon ability that you get upon entering that is just possibly my favorite thing that we made.
And the art that Daniel Commercy did for that just so perfectly captures the personality we wanted for that subclass. Just a little goblin grinning from ear to ear, just so mischievous, you can just tell he's about to get into some trouble.
So I'm probably gonna butcher this, but Hedagenku, the race.
The Hengyokai
Yes.
turn into animals.
Yeah. So
Yes.
so how did I see they're in there? How did you guys handle that? That was probably one of my favorites from AD&D.
Well, David, as he said earlier, went into older editions and got inspiration, and he actually sent me a thing that he had made for the D&D Next playtest of his version of Hengyokai, and then I kind of took a look at that, got really inspired by the different lore he'd written and the mechanics he'd come up with, and then I just kind of modernized it into the D&D 5e material, and then we just looked over it, did some minor scrubbing of things that weren't exactly perfect, and it was actually a surprisingly quick process for something with 12 subraces to get feeling good.
And is that how you addressed all the different animal types? Each one is its own subrace.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a lot of charts and tables.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. What I did is for that, excuse me. What I did for that is I went back to a lot of the core mythology, about those creatures and connected lore from Japanese mythology and Chinese folklore. And so you have things like, instead of, I think before you've had like a raccoon dog version of the Hingo yokai, and I kind of merged that with the lore on the Tanuki. I did the same thing with the Vanara. I think they'd appeared before as kind of a discrete racial option, and now they're incorporated within the Hingo yokai.
So Elfbait wants to know: are there new variants for existing player races?
Sort of. So we do have a dwarf subrace, and I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, so I think David has a much better grasp on that. That basically of swamp dwarves that were native to Kara-Tur, and those were a lot of fun. They actually get a bonus to dexterity instead of strength or wisdom, and came up with a really interesting mechanic, I think, for when they get frightened. If David wants to pick up the baton for me on that one.
Yeah. So again, this one took a lot of inspiration from some of the original Kara-Tur material, because there wasn't a lot in terms of the actual mechanic for the race. They had a lot of lore behind them, but not a lot that I could find in terms of mechanical presentation. But they were definitely one that was portrayed as kind of reclusive, reluctant to kind of interact with other people. They preferred to remain hidden, and so yeah, we were able to do some neat stuff, kind of tapping into that. So a very kind of non-traditional dwarf, unless you're potentially familiar with maybe some of the dwarves from Dragonlance.
And another thing we did with the races was we wanted to create a kind of more island Kuotoa for the Kara-Tur than you traditionally get on like the Sword Coast. And we wanted to put a spin on it where instead of them being driven mad by mind flayers, it was instead by evil yokai or nature spirits that twisted them and warped them, and these ones are less about the Underdark and more about like brightly colored, koi inspired Kuo-toa that I think are pretty fun.
Oh, that's actually really cool. I'm digging that. And I'm also digging the idea of introducing that into a game to your players who may know what a kotoa is, but then you describe them and they look like koi, and how can it be threatening then?
Well, probably by summoning their own minor god from their insane zealotry and then sticking that god on the party. That'd be a way to make them threatening, I think.
Is it a giant koi though?
It could be, or it could be a spoon. No one knows how the Kuo-toa work.
That is true. So Elfate has another question. What about races that never existed in Kara-Tur? Was out like Dragonborn and Tieflings? You guys touch on that at all?
Not so much. Mostly we just addressed that of many of the same types of races that are in the Sword Coast are also present in Kara-Tur, but we did introduce a relatively new race inspired by Blizzard's WoW, was World of Warcraft. We introduced a race of Pandaren, just a bunch of jolly, rotund panda people who like to drink and get merry, but also have a very structured and hierarchical society. But they love travelers because they get information. And we just wanted to. One of their abilities that I love is they can curl up into a ball and roll around, which I think is just a bunch of fun for both roleplay and combat purposes.
I think you're stereotyping panda bears, though. My favorite meme or gif is where there's the panda bear rolling around and there's the laser blast. I don't know if you've seen that or not. Always brings a smile to my face. Garbo Fortress wants to know how many or which Eastern real world cultures can one find in the setting? How much and how do you blend them? I'm thinking Japan, Chinese, Mongolia, Thai.
Yeah, I think Kara-Tur originally was kind of focused on, yeah, kind of the Mongolian, kind of in the north, with the hordes that they had up there, so stellar work there. But also, yeah, Chinese, Japanese, and kind of the main portion of the continent. You had some influence from like Korea, but not a lot. I mean, in terms of the mythology, they didn't borrow a whole lot. A lot of it was just sort of the imagery, some of the terminology. But as far as like the religious practices that you find, I mean, it's pretty distinct. Again, I mean, there's a little bit in terms of, they call it, I think, the celestial heavens. They refer to spirits. So we didn't delve too much into that. We did, for the druid option, the circle of the Onmoije, that incorporates animism, that's kind of common in some of the religious beliefs from the area. But as far as specifics, yeah, I mean, we didn't deviate too much from that, just because we wanted to leave things a little bit open-ended so that we didn't give you like a singular definitive version of Kara-Tur, but rather a toolkit of options that you could use to create your own.
So one of the things that I noticed with a quick leaf through, you guys did a sumo subclass, but I don't think I would have ever went with barbarian for that.
Well, that was mostly a product of my design. I have wanted for the longest time, right, almost immediately when I took a look at 5th edition Barbarian, I wanted a Barbarian that could grapple. And I know they can grapple really well, but I wanted something that was focused on that. And when we really took a look into different things that could potentially fit that, or at least when I did, I saw sumo wrestlers. They're all about grabbing your opponent, shoving your opponent, trying to get them out of the ring, bearing their assault against you, doing some open palm strikes. And when I just saw that and realized that I could build that in an authentic way with Barbarian to create something that is really, really spectacular at that, it actually was an amazing fit.
So were you able to effectively merge in the thousand hand slap?
Not quite so much, though their capstone is if you have a creature grappled, you can take it and throw it at another guy.
People should just be doing that anyway. I played a grappler barbarian, and that was his go-to move.
Well, now there's mechanics to support it. It actually has damage numbers and saving throws and all of that associated with it.
You know, you figure what you double your strength as a when you're raging for lifting and carrying stuff. Oh, with the bear totem anyway, and then a Goliath on top of that. So I'm like, yeah, he can probably throw most things. A
One of my
smart truck.
one of my players, when I initially made this subclass, I was running a long-running campaign that ended about a month and a half ago, and I'm just starting a new one this weekend. But one of my players actually built a barbarian that counted as gargantuan for the purpose of lifting and carrying capacity, and so he just picked up like carts and threw them at people.
Um, Garwood Fortress. I always wanted a Dal Sim style monk myself. You got any of that in there?
Not quite so much. The monk subclass we built is Way of the Sohei, which is actually focused on mounted combat. And if you don't have a mount, summoning your own, using your key points. And it was a weird build, but I think it actually worked out really nicely.
Do you address any of the stuff of like, oh well, I have these abilities, but what if I'm in a place where I can't use a mount, or is it kind of you? Is it kind of you're just boned?
We made sure, and David was very regimented on me when I was writing this one, to make sure that it had an ability at every single level that was useful, whether you were mounted or not. But even better when you were mounted.
Okay, kind of like what they did with the knight in
Yes.
Xanathar's.
Yes, a lot of that, yes.
Yeah, I felt like that was one of the best moves they made with that book was how do we make a cavalier that's cool, can do the thing that you would expect them to do, but not suck when you put them in the dungeon. And by the way, Cardboard Fortress, Dalsim was the worst character you could possibly choose anyway. I had a friend that every time would want to play him, but he would always lose. But so this seems like a fun project to work on. You guys have a good time putting this together.
I definitely did. It was really, really enjoyable just to get to work with David, and just it was so lighthearted for most of it up until the end. We were like, "Oh my God, we need to get this out there!" But but yeah, it was a really enjoyable project, and I really like doing the research actually because there are so many interesting myths that I had never heard of before really delving deep into it.
Well, you know that kind of leads me to the next question: is like, were there any unexpected surprises, either pleasant or otherwise?
Well, I mean, as far as scheduling goes, I actually, back in, I think it was February, my youngest daughter was hospitalized for about a week, and that sort of threw everything off because I had this nice planned progression that we were going to wrap things up with this, and I had some other work lined up um, on the side, and yeah, I mean, that just threw everything off kilter. Fortunately, it wasn't any sort of serious health concerns for her, just as the oxygen levels and things weren't right. And so, I mean, no IV. We were just in the hospital waiting for those numbers to go up so that they could send us home for a week. But yeah, it was just threw that all off kilter, and so that put us back a little bit. But I think that did end up allowing us to include a little bit more in terms of magic items and things. But yeah, that was just definitely from my end quite an ordeal.
I imagine. You know, unexpected hospital visits are never fun. You know, as someone who's recently gone through something similar with my wife, yeah, it definitely has a way of throwing a monkey wrench into things. You know, and that's just just the time that gets sunk into worrying about and caring for, not to mention all the emotional and mental stress that goes along with it.
Right.
So I hope
Yeah.
she's doing well now.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just had her 9-month well visit.
Excellent. Oh, a little one.
Oh yeah, yeah, very little. That was the whole issue. She had basically a cold, and because she was at the age that she had not developed the ability yet to breathe through her mouth, her snotty nose was preventing her from getting enough oxygen, and that was literally the only thing that we were in there for a week.
Suffocating on snot. Ugh.
Yep.
Terrible. You got to do the sucker thing.
Oh yeah. Oh, and they've got a great one. They've got a big giant pump that they can suck the stuff out of there. And we did that a couple times a day, and yeah, so it was really just waiting for that cold to run its course, and yeah, keep her on oxygen so that she was not going to have any adverse side effects from that.
So there's a couple questions coming in on the chat. One is from Brian Smith, ninjas.
A bit, yeah. One of the things we really wanted to do, especially with all of the ninja and shinobi stuff that's on the D&D wiki, is create a really authentic ninja, and David came up with a really good idea for that.
Yeah, yeah. You'll have to forgive me. I forget quite the details, but we borrowed some decent material from kind of the authentic shinobi and Kuji-in traditions and myths, and built something pretty inspired and resonant with a lot of the anime material out there for the shinobi.
But at the same time, it's really authentic to the original purpose of the shinobi, which is to kind of be guardians and servants of lords and protectors for the most part, with a little bit of that assassin mixed in. But they get sacred seals. Their capstone is to make shadow clones, but it's not anything that we felt we was overblown. And that is our subclass for rogue in the book.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
great illustration of a dwarf shinobi in the book there.
Uh, Cardboard Fortress asked about exotic weapons, or not exotic weapons, but weapons.
So we did include one custom weapon in the book, and this was in the chapter for our original class, the Yojimbo, which is kind of based on samurai stuff, but we didn't want to call it samurai because of the archetype in Xanathar's Guide to Everything for Fighter. It's a Yumi, which is a bow that's kind of unique to Japan. It's kind of made to be the same height as its wielder, and it has an extremely high draw strength, and for that reason, a very powerful kick to it. And so it's a strength-based bow that's meant to be used from a primarily immobile location by a fighter who just kind of sits there and shoots, and with very powerful arrows. So that's the one custom weapon or exotic weapon, I could say, that we included in the book. But other things are much better represented in the magic items section of things that we did.
Do you guys discuss firearms and gunpowder in here? Because I see a picture of, I think it's a Koatoa with a firearm.
Yes, one of the the ranger subclass that we made is the Ashigaru, which is this idea of a peasant fighter that, because they have very little support from the lords, has taken up the impropriety of firearms to defend themselves. And so this was inspired basically by the gun fu or gun kata in movies, of like get up close with guns, use some martial arts, shoot, use improvised weapons. And so yes, that's our one subclass that really talks about firearms.
Okay. I also see a goblin with a foxtail.
That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the sorcerer subclass, the Kitsunetsuki. Uh, Basically, it is a sorcerer that has either they or their family has gained the attention of a mischievous kitsune fox spirit, and has kind of begun to exhibit some kitsune traits.
Oh, nice. So I'm kind of flipping through the book as we're talking here, and the art is fantastic.
Oh yeah, Daniel Commercy really did an amazing job, and I have to give a shout out to OAP's graphic designer, Nathaniel Rue. He did almost all of the background art. He made the template for what the pages look like, and if you look at the character-centric pieces behind them, the background art, Nate did pretty much all of that, and he is amazing, and OAP is so lucky to have him.
I also think he's in the chat today. So
Oh, good.
I saw him answering. So I saw him answering a question. And he's like, "I did the art," and I think it was a Nathan. So it all lines up. But yeah, the art is very impressive, and you guys went all out on that. So you guys are also running a sale, right? For like, I don't know when it ends.
June 9th. The idea is that for like the first 2 weeks after the book is released, and it was released this past Friday, that we're releasing it for a $5 off discount, just for people who get in there and help make it visible with public sales and that kind of stuff, just to give back to the community a little bit.
Cool. You know, and obviously, just by judging by the art alone, like, you know, I'm sure it looks like you guys poured a lot of time, energy, and money into this project.
Yeah, and some of that was fun. I really like. I've worked with Daniel on some of the stuff that I've done before, and recommended him for some other projects. But he's a lot of fun to go back and forth with in terms of art direction. So I got to do a lot of that. I mean, I would chat with Ross about some of the basic ideas, but really, you know, drilling down and making sure we were getting what we wanted, and talking with Daniel on that was a lot of fun.
So, who did the art directing mostly, or did you guys share that duty?
That was mostly David. For the most part, I had this ideas of this is what I think would be cool to see, but then David would coordinate everything, and as you can see, the results are pretty amazing.
I have to agree. I
Yeah.
mean, we're just starting to dabble in some of content creation and working with artists, and I'm the one doing that. So that it's a process, and I'm sure the artists would have an easier time if they were dealing with somebody else, because they would do something and then it would give me an idea, and I'm like, can you change this now?
Yeah, yeah. There were several pieces where I kind of just told him, you know, look, we want kind of someone that looks like they are using magic, and we think we want it to be, you know, a female tabaxi, and then I just kind of that would be all I'd give him and let him run wild. There were other times, like for the sumo, that lizard folk sumo barbarian. Um, that one I had a couple of specific pieces that I'd sent to him, just in terms of the sheer bulk of the body, some of the posing. Same thing with the Yojimbo on the cover. You know, provided some pretty specific references for him, and he did a great job delivering on those. But the ones that were the most fun were, yeah, the ones where I kind of gave him a lot more freedom to do the things that he wanted to do.
Every time I see the word the Yojimbo, or hear you guys mention it, all I can think about is a rabbit with a katana.
And you can do
Yeah.
that. You can do that in this. The Hengeyokai, there is an Usagi subrace. So you can play a rabbit Yojimbo that is literally an Usagi Yojimbo.
Uh,
So choose.
yeah. All right, I know one thing to ban from the table immediately. And then the next thing you know, you're gonna have, you know, four Shinobi turtles.
Yep, yep.
With some sort of were rat
Yeah,
master, maybe a Brahmin wizard.
the silliness will never end.
Nope.
So, Cardboard Fortress. When I think of Eastern martial stuff, I imagine about less armor than standard D&D assumes. Have you made any adjustments to classes to account for this? Implement new forms of armor or new forms of armor.
Not quite as much. One of our goals was to let this kind of blend seamlessly into 5th edition, and so we tried not to do too much of fiddling with equipment or different things that classes could already be expected to have. So classes that normally wouldn't wear armor are still going to be good not wearing armor in this, or things that are good with medium armor are still going to be good with medium armor. we didn't want to touch on too much of that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the player's handbook doesn't go into it too much, but there are some mentions, in monk weapons, um, where they call out some stuff like the nunchaku is simply, two clubs bound together by a length of chain. So we kind of went with that basic assumption that if there were different armor types that you wanted to incorporate into your game, a lot of that can simply be done by reflavoring it.
What do you say, Cardboard Fortress? You don't think wicker is as good as steel? Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a game, so it doesn't matter. Besides, if everyone's kind of wearing the same armor anyway, it kind of matches up. Uh, let's see. Pebcac. Error. Do any of the books have a good framework for ocean-based campaigns? So that's kind of a general question, I think. Um, not currently, maybe Sword Coast Adventures, but that's about it. Like, and that's not really going to give you what you're looking for. You guys talk about being on an island. I don't know if you addressed this at all.
Not so much. I mean, there are a few races that we made that have a swimming speed and can breathe underwater, which could definitely be used in that context, but we don't touch on that much in this book, no.
Our resident military guy is weighing in about armor. It's like we still use ceramic body armor today, not steel. Steel, well, steel's heavy. So, okay, so Cardboard Fortress is saying if someone wants to play a paladin, it sort of assumes full plate, which is no real Eastern equivalent. But I also feel like if you're playing in that setting, it's going to be flavored by the culture anyway. So, what were some of the challenges that you guys had to overcome with this project,
Hmm.
other than health issues?
Right. Um, no, I mean, I think we did encounter a few things. I mean, Ross was saying earlier, um, with the um, with the monk that we were designing. I was pretty firm in making sure that even though it's a Sohei, they are traditionally horseback riders. It had to have options um, that made it still enjoyable to play off of a mount. Um, I took a pretty hard stance on the bard tradition, and making sure that the we were working with some stories about um, blindness and some traditions in Japanese culture as to where those people fit in, and the um, kind of the stories that were told about them. And so I'm pretty adamant that we had to be kind of as not necessarily realistic, um, but I didn't want to just end up like saying, "Oh, you're blind, but you get all these benefits, so really you're not blind," or making it just sort of a narrative thing. I really wanted to have that have some weight. So there were some places like that where we had to spend a little bit more time really drilling down and making sure things worked the way that we wanted.
Yeah, I mean that's always tricky. The blind character concept. Well, it's fun. It's just not practical. Like I don't think anyone would choose to be blind. And in an actual combat, like being blinded is a real problem. That's why we have flashbang grenades. That's why they use smoke and things to basically blind you. That's why there's pepper spray. That's why a small cut on your forehead can quickly become a huge problem in the middle of combat. So you guys have a feat section. What kind of stuff do you guys cover in there?
Mostly it was a racial feats section, just to kind of spice up the racial choices, especially with the racial feats from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. We wanted to make sure that we kind of fit that mold of things that build off of the mechanics or are inspired by the lore, but aren't necessarily things we could have fit into the race itself. But in addition to that, we have a couple of feats. One, the Origami Master, which is pretty fun and whimsical and primarily roleplay driven, allowing you to use paper to create shuriken that you can use, but go away after one use. Caltrops, you can make a little bird that you can throw and it'll twirl around a little bit in the air. And just general fun things to reward player creativity. But another one that we have is one of the major features of the Yojimbo is they can enter stances and use balance points to add effects to those stances. And I was inspired a bit by the Battle Master feat, where you can choose one of the martial techniques in the Battle Master and be able to use it with a superiority die. Well, this feat allows you to learn 2 stances from the Yojimbo, and you get 1 balance point that refreshes every short or long rest to allow you to kind of simulate that with any class.
Well, one of the questions coming in from Jack Dolan, they want to know about gods and deities. Did you do anything with that?
Not directly. We reference a little bit in some of the material. I think we're kind of assuming that you're either going to use this in your own homebrew setting, in which case you've got the gods and deities kind of all sorted out, and you're just looking to add some of this flavor, or you're going to be using it with Kara-Tur, in which case there's existing material there, and we didn't want to kind of rehash all of that, especially again if there was a possibility that you weren't even going to use it. So it's essentially, the language, the references are 100% compatible with Kara-Tur, but they're also, oblique and subtle enough that they adapt very easily to sort of any mythology that you would want to use to underpin it.
So Boris Stremlin also wants to know, which is a good point too about the religions, is there's a ton of stuff out there if you just want to name the deities per se, and then you can probably work with what's already there for 5e pretty easily. But Boris wants to know how much of the material is inspired by China and other countries in the region, as opposed to Japan. One recent critique of Oriental Ventures attacked the Japan-centeredness of the setting.
Yeah, I think because in my mind, there's so many in the real world, particularly when you look at like the animism and Buddhism in the region. They feed back and forth between China and Japan. They're very much kind of they go back and forth and they reference each other and they adapt to changes across history. So, we definitely, for a lot of options, they're drawn from Japan first, but some of that material has been influenced by China. So yeah, it's definitely hard to kind of sort out specifically where certain things were coming from, but we tried to be, where reasonable, we tried to make things sort of have an influence from multiple different places. And a lot of it too was, again, we were looking a lot first at Kara-Tur as opposed to just drawing first from real world sources.
The the tough hurdle too is the image of the ninja or the samurai are just so evocative, and while Shaolin monks are cool, I just feel like they don't capture the imagination the way as the samurai and the ninja do. So I feel like that's where a lot of the pull is.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we actually did have a subclass that was inspired by a completely different area. The Brahmin wizard is very heavily inspired by that caste in India of teachers and doctors and holders of sacred texts, and that's in there as an ability to use spell scrolls better than any other character in the entirety of the edition, and also create their own spell scrolls that they can teach others to use.
That's funny you mentioned that right now because Kenyatta just asked the question, what influence did you take from India? Uh, India contributed a great deal to nearly every culture on that side of the planet. And they also say, they also say that's where martial arts came from. Uh, So DM Don, any thoughts or plans on doing more with this in the future, monster manuals and so on?
I mean, there's nothing we've really talked about at the moment. A really great resource if you want monsters from the region is on the DM's Guild. One of the most popular titles of all time is Monsters of the Orient, which gets into those themes of using that word that probably isn't that great, but the monsters in it are very well done. So you could probably use those quite well with the character options that we've created here.
Cool.
Yeah, and I know for my part, I mean, I'm pretty booked up with stuff. I've got um, working with a company out of the Netherlands, Loresmith, to do some stuff for a Patreon that they're launching. They've got a line of adventures that starts with this great one called Claws of Madness that I'm working on one of their sequels for. And then they also have, what was it, Remarkable Ends in their drinks. And so I'm talking with the creator there about he wants to do something as a follow up. And so, yeah, working with him on that capacity. So I imagine a lot of my summer, probably through the fall, is pretty filled up with some other projects. But yeah, I mean, Ross has been really fun to work with, so I would not rule out the possibility of a future collaboration between us.
Neither would I. And speaking of busy, I'm working on a series of collaborations with Benjamin Huffman from Sterling Vermin Adventuring Company, working on OAP's independent projects, working on 2 different race compendiums, another new class, and there's a lot of projects coming down the pipeline.
That's good to see you guys are busy. I'm also sure if these guys sell a ton of these books as well, that might change their mind or open up their schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a factor as well. If time and money weren't a factor, where would you want to go next with something like this, or have you said everything you kind of had to say on it?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I have recently started looking at some products that are influenced by other real world regions. I just ordered a copy of Kaikanga. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, but it's a great like Afro punk, Afro futuristic sort of inspired take on a fantasy RPG that is set out of Africa. There's a really cool one. I think it's called the elephant and the macaw flag. I'm probably butchering that, but it's a Brazilian. Unfortunately, not available in a U.S. translation, but I think they've got some novels out of that. So yeah, I mean, the Forgotten Realms has got some other really cool places with a lot of other cultural influences that I think it'd be fun to take a peek at. If time and money were no object.
Do you read Portuguese?
I do not. I actually there was brought to my attention by there's an artist who had done something kind of inspired by some Brazilian mythology, and we exchanged a little bit back and forth, and he drew my attention to that, and so I've been checking out a little bit of that, to see what might be available if there's any sort of third-party translations or anything, but I've not come across anything yet. But it looks very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think I caught the tail end of that Twitter conversation, and then we kind of half joked that that's the next collaboration.
But yeah, and with Tabaxi being so popular, I mean, I really feel like there's a market there for some of that Maztica stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you just can mash Tabaxi and Warlocks in there, you'll be golden.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We always joked our channel will be one of the top channels until someone comes along with the all Warlock channel.
Mm-hmm.
Kobold Press does a lot of warlocks too.
Yeah, they do. They do. They just do a lot of stuff in general, but there's a bunch of Warlock stuff over there as well. Isn't that the name of their?
Yeah, their little magazine.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Wolfgang's not doing more Clockwork stuff. I mean, I guess with all that Midgard all those Midgard books he's selling. He's too busy for that. But
They did
that was what we
do.
talked about back in the day.
They did do deep. Their one of their deep magics was dedicated to clockwork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was actually one of the
It's
best
my
ones.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what Wolfgang loves. That was how I got my first article in his magazine. Was appealing to his pet love of clockworks.
So Carbon Fortress says advice: look into the jungles of Malatra. It's in the Forgotten Realms and is a primitive jungle setting that is really cool. Been around since second edition.
Yeah, we actually reference Malatra a lot in the Pandaren race, saying that they kind of live in the misty, forested mountains of Malatra. And so that'd be a good place to put them if you run that campaign setting.
One of my favorite trilogies to read was the Mystica trilogy, and that that also dealt with another area of the Forgotten Realms, and I really enjoyed it. Probably one of the reasons I really enjoyed it because it was a lot different than the rest of the Forgotten Realms. They had
Mm-hmm.
Jaguar warriors and cool, all kinds of cool stuff in there. So
And what's the other one? They've got another Anachrome or something. There's another continent in the Forgotten Realms as well that I think has like almost nothing attached to it.
so that might be an interesting place for people to play and start fleshing out. Carbon Fortress had asked about the five elements. If you guys do anything with that.
Yes, we did. The Godai domain of Cleric. The entire idea is you maintain balance in the multiverse by attuning to the different elemental forces of the elemental chaos, and then you can find Aether, sometimes referred to as Void, in the astral and ethereal planes. That's where they draw that power from. And that cleric, every day when they wake up, can attune to a different of those powers, giving a new list of domain spells and a new first level feature. That is a collection of a couple cantrips and then resistance to a type of damage. And then their channel divinity at second level lets them switch on the fly to be an ultra flexible and really fun cleric.
I'm not actually sure what the five elements are because I've seen. So obviously there's the four: earth, air, fire, and water. But I've also seen wood used as an element and metal.
Sometimes also referred to as Aether. The whole idea is that it's kind of like the force of mortal creativity and dreams, and it's oddly psionic in nature if you really get down into it, and that's how we're able to kind of sneak that into the book.
Gotcha. I know one of my partners, Nate, is a huge fan of psionics, and is dismayed every time a new edition comes out, and they don't make it and make it part of the core. And I'm like, dude, it's never going to be part of the core. Never, ever.
Well, if you're watching Mike Merle's Happy Fun Hour, he's doing a lot of segments on psionic stuff right now.
Yeah, I think they're really trying hard to figure it out. So it makes me wonder, where they're leaning next. I mean, both Eberron and Dark Sun have psionic components to them, especially Dark Sun. But it's hard. It's really hard to say because it's not like they're releasing campaign setting books. But at the same time, I feel like they want to keep kind of like expanding the DM's Guild, so they have to like release it in some form in order to expand it into the DM's Guild. At least if they're sticking with the model they've been doing. Which you're both creators in the DM's Guild. What is one of the properties you'd like to get access to that isn't there yet?
I mean, Dark Sun is top for me just because of the psionics and the cool stuff. I mean, I did a lot of research in 4th edition on that and some of the stuff that I got to come up with. It'd be very easy to adapt once they let that out. But yeah, I love that. Love Eberron. That was another big one that I messed around with back in the day. I actually still follow Keith Baker and his blog. It's always interesting to read.
Yeah, I feel like once they release Eberron, he's just gonna be like, and just drop all this stuff in the DM's Guild at once, because he's chomping at the bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's hinted though. There's some sort of agreement that they've got him under that he can't do anything with it.
Yes.
So, so I don't know how that would relate to, the DM's Guild, or if he is maybe even currently behind the scenes, sort of contributing um, some ideas to what they're maybe planning for that.
Well, he can't do anything with it because he doesn't own it. But once
Right.
the DM guild opens up, that would change that because everyone would be able to then use it. So I can't imagine it'd be like everyone can use it, but you, Keith Baker, you sit in the corner. But he got paid really well to create Eberron, so I don't feel too bad. That was a good gig for a while for him.
Hmm.
And we had him on the show a couple times, so I had to give him a piece of my mind because he beat us in the competition. It was Eberron is way better than anything we would have come up with anyway. But it has a special place in my childhood. What about you, Ross? What would you like to? Where would you like to play around?
So here's the weird thing with me. I'm actually a relatively new player to Dungeons and Dragons. I was not brought in until I was in like my junior year of college at the tail end of fourth. So I'm not actually terribly familiar with a lot of the settings, which is probably why I'm so free to let my imagination run with the weird stuff and just make it work because I don't find myself constrained by what's already there and trying to fit into certain like areas. So I'm really not sure what I'd want to play around with, but I've always loved the idea of different Magitech settings. So that's why Eberron in particular has always really appealed to me.
There was quite a few in third edition that kind of came out. Like Dragon Mech was like another one that's kind of like what you're talking to. And if you're really into weird, just go look for stuff that Bruce Cordell or Monty Cook did back in like third edition because I always attributed those guys to the weird stuff. And they're still making weird stuff over at Monty Cook Games, so I always
Well,
love
I'll have
that
to check
stuff.
that out.
So we are coming up on the hour mark. Anything you guys want to leave us with? We'll start with you, Ross, and then you can close this out, David.
Just if you love D&D, just please check out Honor and Devotions. It's something we poured a lot of love, effort, and time, and a bit of money into, and we just want to see it succeed because we know it's a great book. We've done a lot of playtesting, and just and if you have the time, just check out Outlandish Adventure Productions. We're relatively small, but we love what we do, and we love our audience. So, just if you get the opportunity, give us a look.
Yeah. So for my part, yeah, I definitely want to encourage everyone to check this out. We put a lot of effort into it. I think, there's definitely some places where that shows. There's some cool stuff to add to your game. You obviously don't have to put all of it in. Um, and for my part, I'd like to encourage everyone to come hang out with me on Twitter. I'm loving the profusion of ideas. It's really, really quite inspiring, the D&D community that's on Twitter, and the conversations that are happening there. So I definitely want to be a part of that. And I'd encourage anyone to, if there's anyone out there thinking about putting some stuff on DM Guild, I'd love to see it. I'd be more than happy to give you some thoughts, to work with you on it. That's really my thing. Is I like that this was kind of my first collaborative project that I got into, and I've done several since then. I'm really, really enjoying them. So if anyone's got anything they'd like my input on, let me know.
Yeah, same. Please don't be afraid to hit me up for if you just want eyes on something. I love reviewing products, just
Uh,
seeing people's ideas and giving some thoughts.
awesome. Thanks for the chat, Sam. And as always, links are in the description to check those guys out. Follow them on social media. I've got the Twitter handles in there and links as to their Twitters. There's a subreddit in there, Facebook, and also author pages on the DMs Guild. There's also a 10% coupon code in there for one-time use on purchases of $10 or more. So you guys can check that out too if you want to. If you want to load up your shopping cart and save a little bit of money, you can do that. So that's all in the description. Hey, thanks guys for hanging out. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone in the chat for hanging with us. Until next time, stay nerdy.